Almitra, South Africa, 2011. Almitra walked away beneath the jacaranda trees, and her heart felt like a stone. She faltered slightly and almost stumbled. A slight breeze moved the lilac-coloured flowers on the trees, and a few petals fell into her hair and two upon her cheek. She was glad, for they might hide the tears that crept from the corners of her eyes. She didn't look back, but in her mind she could see him still, her man-cub standing by the grave, and even smell his Aramis cologne. She felt that her heart would break. "Rupert, oh my Rupert," she said beneath her breath, "I cannot fight the ghost of love." It's a story with lots of laughter and some tragedy, based in South Africa. Specifically, it's about a British family, Rupert and Diana, who sell their business in Scotland and move to South Africa to start an olive farm. And this they do. Tragically, Diana suffers a stroke and eventually dies. And Rupert falls in love with a woman of colour, very beautiful, sensual woman. And it's partly the story of her struggle with her addiction to drugs and the relationship that evolves around that, as well as of course the story of what happens on the farm. There are lots of incidents in this. There's fires and floods and life and death. So it's quite an all-embracing story. The underlying theme of the story really is a man's love for a woman, and in fact two women, and the issues that revolve around that. It's based in the Bowland in the Western Cape, not far from Paarl. Characters are based on real characters originally, but as a writer, one's characters evolve and they don't end up as the people that they began with. So although the ideas for many of the characters come from real people, the characters actually written about are not their fiction. It's not the first book I've written, but it's the first book I've actually had published. Well, I have to say I felt a great feeling of achievement, really. It's quite an undertaking to write a book, and it calls for a lot of self-discipline, actually. And I perhaps discovered in myself that I had more than I realised. So, a feeling of achievement, actually. Many people are telling me that it's a good book, but as a writer, of course, one is often full of doubts, and sometimes I look at it and think, yes, I could have done some things better. But I think it is quite a good book, yes.
Oh, do that again. I think if you're selling a book, I wouldn't be saying I think I could do it better.
Okay,
Do you agree, David?
Okay, no,
You don't have to. We can use this, but I wouldn't say that.
No, you're right.
Yep.
You're quite right. So what do I say?
It's almost like saying, don't buy my first book, wait for the second one.
We'll do it again, yeah, sure.
Okay. Is this a good book?
Yes, it's a good book. Lots of people tell me so, and I feel confident in myself that it's an interesting book, a very unique book, actually.
Much better, yeah.
Well, it's for a start, it's a very light-hearted account of the development of an olive farm in South Africa and a British family. It's also an account of the difficulties that some people like that encounter coming to South Africa. But it also does have something of a message of the difficulties sometimes between human beings in relation to love and so on. So it's a good read. The book's obtainable from Amazon, either as an e-book or a paperback or a hard book. So it's very easily obtainable and not very expensive, actually. I'm currently writing the sequel. It's called Even the Jacarandas Weep, and this is the continuing story of Rupert and Almitra, and Almitra's struggle with tick addiction, which is a huge problem in the Western Cape, spreading like a medieval plague. And it's a subject that's very dear to my heart because I have seen the terrible damage that this drug is doing. Oh, I think there's every hope. I think there's every hope. I think there is a mood developing of people who are trying to help young people in particular avoid taking up drugs There are various organisations now coming up with plans for young people to change their role models away from drug dealers into sportsmen and people of the arts and even entrepreneurs. So yes, I think there's every hope. Chapter 3, The Valley of the Wagon Makers, Rupert. I had established my residence in South Africa in the June of 2005, but I had been backwards and forwards to Scotland several times, consulting with lawyers and accountants and finalising the purchase of the farm. Possession of Olive Tree Farm took place in late September, and any doubts about the move had been dispelled from my mind as this new and last adventure of my life began. Like Edith Piaf, it was not in my nature to have regrets, and I always looked to the positive side of everything. Yes, I was sad to leave the castle, but how I loved the sunshine. It was so good on that first morning when I arrived on the farm and stepped out of my rented car, and the warm mid-morning sun hit my face. Oh, the sun, so sadly lacking back home. But of course, this was home now. I breathed in deeply and smelt fir trees, wild pepper and garlic, and something undefinable, but I thought that it was perhaps the earth warming up in the South African spring. The air hummed with insects and bees, and the lack of any breeze made the air hot and heavy, but to me it was a delicious feeling. However, I soon discovered that in the late afternoons a breeze and sometimes even a wind would come from nowhere, and the hot, still air would be thinned and cooled. This was just as well, as by late afternoon, even on autumn days, the very bricks of the house itself seemed to be throbbing in the heat. At that time the grounds around what the estate agents had called a Tuscan manor house were rather bare, and the grass brown and thin, and the trees small and stunted. Diana and I had talked about this, and had a plan for the planting of large, established trees. At that time I knew so little about growing things in South Africa, and just assumed that things struggled. In fact, as we eventually discovered from experience, water was the key. If you water plentifully, most trees grow vigorously in the hot and sometimes humid climate, and water was something that we had plenty of, because we had the rights to pump water from the Berg River.